evening, Norton Media Center and Norton Democratic Town Committee are pleased and proud to sponsor a debate between the candidates running for the Democratic nomination for State Senate in the Bristol and Norfolk District, which includes the city of Attleboro, as well as the towns or part of the towns of Foxborough, Mansfield, Medfield, Norton, Rehoboth, Seekonk, Sharon, and Walpole. And no, I believe they were sober when they concocted that district. My name is Bill Gouveia, and I'm the town moderator for the town of Norton and a columnist for the Sun Chronicle, the fine Attleboro newspaper. It will be my honor to serve as moderator for tonight's debate. Norton Media Center is a nonprofit corporation run by the Norton Cable Access Commission. The committee is appointed in part by the selectmen and made up of people who work to bring you local and public access programming here on your public access channels. The funds to operate this studio and bring you programming such as this come from a portion of your cable bill, which, according to Norton's cable contract with the provider, is designed to improve public access programming. The Norton Democratic Town Committee is a group that works to promote Democratic candidates, philosophies, and principles in the town of Norton and beyond. They are proud to sponsor tonight's debate as part of their continuing and ongoing outreach to the community and their efforts to get more people involved in the local political process. The purpose of this debate this evening is to allow you, the citizens and voters, to hear directly from the candidates seeking to represent you. We hope you will use this information and insights, any insights you may gain this evening, as part of your decision-making process when you go to the polls for the primary on September 19th. This debate this evening is being produced and directed by Jason Benjamin, studio manager for Norton Media Center. There are two candidates seeking the Democratic nomination for the State Senate. Before I introduce our candidates, I would like to quickly review the very simple rules for this evening, all of which have been agreed to by the candidates in advance. Each candidate will get no more than 3 minutes to make an opening statement. They will go in order determined by a coin flip. After opening statements, the candidates will be asked a question chosen by me, including suggestions made by voters, viewers, and myself. But in the end, I chose the question. Nobody else has seen them. If you don't like the questions, it's all my fault. Each candidate will have no more than 3 minutes to answer the questions, and all candidates will be asked the same question. After the last candidate has answered, the candidates will get no more than 1 minute for rebuttal. After the last question, the candidates will be given no more than 3 minutes to make a closing statement. The time for each candidate will be kept here by me. When time is running out, I will make the candidate aware. If they do not end in time, it will be my job to politely stop them to ensure fairness for all. And while we encourage a vigorous and thorough debate of the issues, I will not allow personal attacks against any individuals. And that's a problem I am entirely sure we will not have tonight. With all that said and done, let us now move to the debate. It is my pleasure to introduce the two candidates. First, to my immediate right is Mr. Paul Feeney from Foxborough, and to my far right is Mr. Ted Phillips from Sharon. Gentlemen, we thank you very much for joining us, and let's get right to it.
Sounds good.
And we will begin our first opening statement, which comes from, if I haven't screwed it up already, I believe it starts with Mr. Phillips.
That's right. Good evening. I want to first start off by thanking the Norton Media Center and the Norton Democratic Town Committee for making this debate possible, and to Bill Gouveia for scheduling it as well as moderating it. To the viewing public at home, my name is Ted Phillips, and I'm one of the Democrats who's running to replace Jim Timilty in the State Senate. I grew up just up the road in Sharon. I'm a proud graduate of the Sharon Public Schools and the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, and I've been involved in town government since I was old enough to vote. I've also worked for the last 11 years on Beacon Hill, learning to effectively advocate for residents and pass meaningful legislation that helps people. I believe that Massachusetts is the best state in the country to live in, particularly this district, and there are plenty of studies to back that up. But here's what I also believe. We can do so much better. by tackling pressing issues like education and transportation reform, the opioid crisis, and how we take care of our seniors, I know that we can improve the quality of life for our friends and neighbors here in the Bristol and Norfolk district, and that's why I'm asking for your support in the Democratic primary on September 19th.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Feeney.
Thank you, Mr. Gouveia, Norton Media Center, Norton Democratic Town Committee, and you watching at home or online. Thanks for stopping by to get to know a little bit about us, the folks that seek to represent you in the state Senate. My name is Paul Feeney. I'm a Democrat, and I hope to earn your support, your trust, and your vote on Tuesday, September 19th. I live on North Street in Foxborough with my wife, Laura, who's here with us tonight. I want to take a moment to let you know who I am, where I come from, why I'm running, and how I intend to be your voice on Beacon Hill. I grew up in Jamaica Plain and entered the workforce right after graduating Don Bosco High School in 1996. For the last 20 years, I worked for the telephone company. In 2001, I married my high school sweetheart, and when it came time for us to buy a house, we chose Foxborough. Like many of you, we feel truly blessed to live in this wonderful region of the Commonwealth. Shortly after buying our home in Foxborough, I took a leave of absence from my job to serve as the first Chief of Staff to Senator Jim Timilty. Jim always prioritized the people of this district above all else. That is exactly what we should expect from our state senator and exactly how I intend to serve. I have spent my life as a blue-collar worker, which I think we need more of, by the way, in the state Senate. I've been blessed to have some great opportunities also along the way. I'm proud of my service as a selectman in Foxborough and as the chairman of that board during very difficult economic times. I also represent my coworkers as the legislative director of IBEW Local 2222. I've seen firsthand what works in the Massachusetts legislature, and more often than not, what doesn't work. Though I wasn't sure I'd ever put my name on a ballot again, I think most of you tuning into this debate will agree with me. These are not normal times, and in light of our political discourse recently, there's just too much at stake for me to sit on the sidelines. Just last year, I was honored to serve as a state director of the Bernie Sanders campaign here in Massachusetts and in Connecticut. That campaign inspired me, not just because of the issues we were talking about, but because of the people that got involved. Politics at all levels just doesn't work for working class, regular middle class families anymore. We need to send a message to Beacon Hill that politics as usual is no longer acceptable. People are facing real issues that call for bold and principled leaders. Our healthcare system is broken. We are in the midst of a deadly substance abuse and opioid crisis. Public transportation needs are not being met. Our communities are struggling to pay for education. College students are facing a lifetime of debt, and seniors on a fixed income can't afford their medications. Yet we keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. I look forward to talking about the issues facing us tonight, and I urge you to get out and vote in the Democratic primary and to consider me with your vote on Tuesday, September 19th. Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. And we will go to the questions, and we will start the first question with Mr. Feeney. Mr. Feeney, what, in your opinion, are the main issues that clearly separate you and your opponent in this race? What should cause voters to cast their ballot for you instead of your opponent?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Great question. Look, we're running in a Democratic primary, Mr. Phillips and I. You won't find a lot of daylight between us on most issues, but there are a few key issues that I think warrant mention. One of them being healthcare. I'm a proponent of single-payer healthcare. I think our system's broken. I think we need a drastic overhaul. I think it's important that we address this now in Massachusetts and that we lead the way. My opponent has signified that he doesn't support that. I do, and I think that's a main difference. Above and beyond issues which I think we'll get into tonight, there's a style difference. There's a different approach. Mr. Phillips works awfully hard in the State House. He's done a lot of work for the people that his boss represents in the House. But I think too often we get caught in this cycle of folks where we have paralysis by analysis, where we do the same thing over and over again. And we don't have a lot of bold leadership, somebody who's willing to stand up and fight for people, to buck the system, to stand up for regular, average working people. Look, I've done that my entire life, and I think that separates me in this race. I've been a blue-collar worker for the last 20 years. I've also served as a selectman in Foxborough, as the chairman of that board. I've worked on campaigns here in this state and other states. I've seen firsthand how important it is that we have advocates and senators and legislators that stick up for people, that don't just play the political game, that aren't worried about another notch in a political career, but that really fight for people. And I'll do that for the people of this district as their state senator.
Thank you very much. Ms. Phillips, same question to you. What are the main issues that clearly separate you and your opponent in this race? What should cause voters to cast their ballots for you rather than your opponent?
It's a great question. I think that Paul hit it right on the head. Healthcare is one of those issues that where there is a clear difference between us. Paul thinks that single payer is achievable in Massachusetts, and I'm skeptical that it can be achieved on a state-by-state basis. I believe in single payer. I just believe that it has to be done at the national level. When you look at the examples of California and Vermont, both states had gone up to the edge. They had filed single payer legislation and had done cost analysis on it. But in both states, both large state and small state, they came up short. They basically figured, they calculated that the economic shock to the system was going to be too much for the state to bear. And both times, the Democratic governor had to walk away and say, we can't do it. So I'm interested in healthcare reforms that are on the table right now that will achieve results. Right now, there are senators who are working, they've convened a working group over the summer to close the $200 million gap in mass health right now. Governor Charlie Baker had proposed a number of reforms at the beginning of the summer that dealt with eligibility, and these reforms were deemed to be unacceptable because they would have kicked people off of their health insurance. So the Senate's gone back to the table, and they're trying to come up with new solutions to tackle this. So I believe in that process. I believe in coming up with meaningful reforms that we can tackle now. The Price Provider Cost Commission came up with reforms in March of 2017. Those recommendations still haven't been acted on. I do understand what Paul is saying about paralysis by analysis, but the fact is that I want to get in there. We have reforms that are on the table right now. I want to get in there. I want to try to enact them so that we can start making real difference and start moving Massachusetts forward. Like I said, I think that single payer is a noble concept and something that we should be working towards. I just don't believe that it's achievable. I think it's going to cost too much for Massachusetts, and the political conditions aren't right to make it happen. So I'm about getting results right now.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Mr. Feeney, 1 minute for rebuttal.
Thank you, Bill. I know we've heard that a lot. We've heard that a lot from people in that building especially, that, well, we can't achieve it. It's just too hard. I think the quote that pops into my head as we do these things, not because they're easy, but because they're hard. We have to be bold. We have to be ambitious at some point. This system, the healthcare system that we're talking about, that's kind of a glaring difference between us, is set up just to benefit those that seek profit. That doesn't work for regular people. We have the ability now, there's legislation filed, and there was a companion piece filed this year that actually looks at the costs, and I think will bear out and show that we can afford it in Massachusetts. As far as what other states have done, you're right, Vermont screwed it up. Vermont also gave us civil unions. Massachusetts gave us gay marriage. It's important for us to lead the way in Massachusetts. We led the way with accessibility. We should lead the way with affordability. I think single payer is the right way to go. We just have to be bold and get it done.
Thank you. And Ms. Phillips, 1 minute for rebuttal.
Yeah, I would just go back to the question of where we're going to get the money. I just don't see it right now. If we're struggling to close a $200 million gap, and it's projected that single payer is going to cost us tens of billions of dollars, I don't know where we get that. And so I can't vote for something that will put the burden on the taxpayer. So that's really troubling to me. And so I do agree that we need bold action. I would love to see bold action, but we also have to have the resources to match it, and we don't have those right now.
Thank you very much. Now that you've both completely destroyed my question.
That was the healthcare question, right?
Later on. But we'll move to the second question, and this one we'll start with Mr. Phillips.
Okay.
Mr. Phillips, economic development is something this area needs badly.
Yep.
Areas like Route 1 in Foxborough are places where development can not only help that town, but the state as well. How do you propose to advance development in that area as well as throughout the district? And what kind of development would you ideally like to attract?
It's a great question. What kind of development would I like to attract? I don't know that that's for me to say. I think the job of a state senator is to sit down with local officials and with business owners and understand what their vision for their towns are, and then go about matching up the right state resources to make that happen. So, I could say that I would like to see more commercial space or more retail space along the Route 1 corridor, but I think that's really up to Foxborough to decide what's best for them. What we need to do at the state level is then, like I said, go out and find the resources that match them. The Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development have a wide array of wonderful grants that people can take advantage of. Mansfield actually just got a hold of one, or was just announced as the recipient of one 2 days ago, I believe, which was a MassWorks grant for the downtown. Those are the type of programs that I would advocate for. That's the best use of a state senator's time, which is to go and advocate for those resources at the state government level and bring them back to the cities and towns. So that's how I would approach that challenge of economic development. It's by sitting down with the business owners, with the local officials, finding out what they want, and then, making that our mission to go out and get it.
Thank you very much. Mr. Feeney, same question to you. Economic development is something this area is in badly needs. Areas like Route 1 and Foxborough can not only help that town, but the state as well if they're developed properly. How do you propose to advance development in that area as well as throughout the district? And what kind of development would you ideally like to attract?
So I think you hit it right on the head, Mr. Moderator, when you talked about Route 1 in Foxborough. I know you were at the game last night at Gillette Stadium, and if you look across the street...
I had to bring that up.
I know, it's been a tough night. It's been a tough night. But if you look across the street, that parking lot, it's become a bit of Siberia on that side of Route 1, where we've been talking about economic development for so many years, certainly since I moved to the district. But yet we've yet to see any realization of that. And I know in Foxborough, when I was on the Board of Selectmen, we talked a lot about kind of what our master plan looked like. And a lot of our focus centered on Route 1 growth. And I think you'll find that there's a lot of support throughout the other towns in this district, because they understand that if we grow up on Route 1, there'll be kind of a net growth effect throughout the entire region. It means jobs, it means more tax money. So overall, we want to see that. I will say that I think across the Commonwealth, anytime we see expanded growth, it's centered around transportation. We just saw it in Mansfield. We see, as Ted was talking about, a lot of the grants that are given out from the state. It's centered around transportation. You want to have public transportation opportunities so that you can not only bring people to the development, but that if you have housing, that people can actually get to work in the morning and home at night. So I think it's important that we look at Route 1 especially. We can do that if we invest in public transportation. I support the commuter rail project largely because of that. But in addition to that, I think the type of development I'd like to see, look, it's time for us to be innovative. We have a great green energy economy that's thriving in Massachusetts. We're right on the cusp of thriving in Massachusetts. It's a fast-growing sector, and I think we can entice a lot of those companies in research and development to come to this area. I was always a proponent in this district, especially of the life sciences, where we can work with communities, the state can work with communities, to identify places where we can do what they call cluster development, build to spec, bring in life sciences, really developments that are job-centric, that bring a lot of people into our communities and don't necessarily drain a lot of the resources. So I think it's an important issue as a senator. Certainly you can't just punt to the municipalities. You have to work along with them and make sure that we're giving them the resources and working with them in the master plan so that we have economic growth that works for each community.
Thank you, Mr. Feeney. Mr. Phillips, 1 minute for rebuttal.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add is that there's, Paul mentioned the green economy, and that's great. There's also a lot of opportunities in high-tech manufacturing as well. That sort of dovetails off of the life sciences and the biotech. As the field expands out of Cambridge, there's some great opportunities. I know Mansfield has put in there have been some businesses that have moved into the office park, and I think there are opportunities along the Route 1 corridor, which, as mentioned, is definitely an economic engine for the region, to place some of that there.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Mr. Feeney, 1 minute for anything you'd like to add?
Not a lot to add other than, I think it's important that we look at, as Ted said, manufacturing, green economy, life sciences. The economic engine that we're seeing in this area, obviously we look at the unemployment numbers, and when you look at the data, unemployment has kind of held steady, and it looks like we're in a pretty good spot. But there's also a lot of folks that are looking for jobs right here at home, right here in this district. And when you look at companies that are in Cambridge, it's not easy for people to get to. We have a great area. The area sells itself as far as infrastructure. 95, 495, 140. We have all sorts of highways right here in this area. It makes it a great place, not only to work, but as we know here in this room and the two candidates up here, a great place to live and to raise a family. The area sells itself. Your next senator should go out and pitch that to every single industry out there and make sure that we're getting the jobs and industry and economic growth that we need in this district.
Thank you very much. And now our next question, we will start with Mr. Feeney. Mr. Feeney, the Massachusetts State Senate is a lot of things, but one of them is not transparent. So much of the dealing and meaningful deliberation is done in back rooms and out of the view of the public. What could you do as just one senator to make government, in the state senate especially, more open at the state level?
Yeah, it's frustrating. It's frustrating, especially as a legislative director, like I said, for my coworkers. There's a lot of times we have great ideas, and I always say that the Massachusetts Senate and the legislature as a whole is a place where great ideas go to die. Seems like so many positive initiatives and things are filed each year, yet they never see the light of debate in the chamber. I think it's a problem because the people up there are so protective of their own power that you've taken power and you've put it in the hands of just a few people in the Massachusetts legislature. We need to empower the rank and file members. So whether they're a Democrat like Ted and I in the majority party, or they're a Republican in the minority party, or an independent or green or libertarian, that they have the same power to represent their constituents that we do in the majority party. Too often we see bills and things that are debated in caucus. They never even see the light of debate. They never get discussed in chamber. We don't know how a lot of our elected officials feel because they're not obligated to tell us. Because there is no recordings of them talking about an issue in the chamber, because they deal with it in caucus. And the power players on Beacon Hill simply usher it through and they decide. We need to empower rank and file members. We need to empower them by making it honest and transparent, by forcing them to have debate, by allowing rank and file members to call questions in the chamber so that they're not just dealt with in caucus. There's a lot of reforms that need to be done, Mr. Moderator. I know there's a lot of good people working on that. I'm supportive of anything that we can, any initiatives that make it more transparent, including looking at making sure that the open meeting law applies to the Massachusetts legislature, which I think is a long time coming.
Thank you, Mr. Feeney. Mr. Phillips, same question to you. The Massachusetts State Senate is a lot of things, but one of them is not transparent. So much of the dealing and meaningful deliberation is done in back rooms and out of view of the public. What could you do as just one senator to make government more open at the level of the state and the state senate?
It's true that we have a problem with transparency on Beacon Hill. I will give some credit to Senate President Stan Rosenberg. I think he has done a much better job in trying to bring some sunlight to the process in comparison to his counterpart in the House of Representatives, Speaker DeLeo. So what I would like to see, as Paul said, is more debate moved from the caucus room of the Senate President's office to the floor of the Senate chamber. For too long, we have had bills that have languished and died when they have the support or the co-sponsorship of over half the membership in the legislature. And I think that that's wrong. I think that there are real reforms that can be made in terms of the House and the Senate rules, which can make some of those changes. Things like saying that if more than a majority co-sponsored the bill, it at least has to be brought up for debate on the Senate floor. I think that would be an appropriate change. And I think, again, there's more that we can do to diffuse power back out through the membership and through the committee structure than currently exists right now. We're not doing enough. I bring up this example quite a bit, which is you only need right now 10 people in the Massachusetts legislature in order to pass a bill into a law. You need the joint committee chairs. You need, if the bill costs money, it goes to the Ways and Means chairs, and they're okay. The third reading chairs of both the House and the Senate, the minority leaders of both the House and the Senate, and then the respective heads of the chamber. If you get all those people on board with your bill, you can get it to the governor's desk. But the problem is there's not 10 people in the Massachusetts legislature. There's 200. And so, like I said, we can do a lot better. There are real reforms that can be made, and I would be fully in support of bringing that to the Senate President on day one and telling him that we can do a better job.
Thank you very much. Mr. Feeney, 1 minute to rebut anything?
Yeah, just quickly, I think, bringing up the example of Senate President Rosenberg, he has done a great job. And he's gone light years ahead of where some former leaders were as far as transparency in the building. The problem with that is he's one individual, he's one person. We need to look at reforms that are comprehensive, that really set us forward going forward for generations, right? So that when Senate President Rosenberg is no longer there, that we have those types of protections for people so that there's an open and transparent process in the state Senate. Again, a lot of reforms to do. I think there's also a bit of personal responsibility for your next senator. Your next senator should make sure that we have town meetings throughout this district at a regular basis. We should have office hours. We should model ourselves based on what we want to see in the Senate. I think Senator Timilty was very accessible, very available, and I think our next state senator should do that as well. Certainly the way I intend to serve, I want to make sure that my stream of consciousness comes across to the voters, regular blogs and newsletters, emails, things like that, but really availability and accessibility, I think, is the order of the day for a state senator from the Bristol and Norfolk district.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Phillips, anything you'd like to add in 1 minute?
Yeah, just that, we were talking about transparency in the building on Beacon Hill, but Paul brings up a good point, which is that your senator should be accessible and available. And I promise that if I'm your state senator, you are going to get sick of me. Some people already have throughout this campaign, because we are going to be very, very accessible. We're going to have, as Paul said, town hall meetings, coffees. There's great advances in social media that allow us to get our message out and to connect with our constituents. But there's just going to be an opportunity for you to be able to pick up the phone and call me too, right at my house.
Thank you very much. Now, the next question, we will start with Mr. Phillips. Mr. Phillips, every candidate seems to have set stock answers about education. But I'm going to assume that you're both for it. And that you both are going to promise to work for more funding and higher standards.
Yep.
Now, let's try, if we can, to be a little bit more specific than that. How do we go about providing adequate funding for education in this state? What will you try and do differently? More importantly, what can you realistically help accomplish in this area as one senator, hopefully working in concert with many more?
I'm trying not to answer with a stock answer. So we are working on, I think we can all agree that we're working on an outdated education system. The last education reform was in 1993, and we need, quite frankly, to overhaul the Chapter 70 formula. The problem that I have with the Chapter 70 formula on a fundamental level is that people don't understand it. It's very complicated, it's very complex, and because people don't understand why certain districts get more money than other districts, they don't understand what the difference is between those, between the towns, if their populations are roughly the same. That becomes a problem because then we can't have an honest debate about whether or not the resources are going to where they need to go. I don't believe that we are funding our education system at the levels that we should. I agree with the Foundation Budget Review Commission's recommendation or report that we are underfunding it by $1 to $2 billion. I tend to think it's on the higher side. I think we're probably $2 billion plus, which is one of the reasons why I support the Fair Share Amendment to, bring in the revenue and close that gap. But one of the core things that I want to do as a state senator is to get in and find a way to simplify the formula so that people in Massachusetts can understand it in an explanation of 30 seconds or less, so that we can then get to brass tacks about whether or not we're adequately funding. Because I think right now people say, we're already taxed too much, we're fine, we don't need this, we'll make do. But if you don't understand the basic formula that we're operating off of, then it's tough to have an honest debate. So, I can tell you where I stand, but if you don't understand the formula to have an informed opinion on it, it's very difficult to ask you to have that conversation. So that's one of the things that I want to change. I think the formula needs to be made more transparent, more simple, so that people understand where their tax dollars are going, because they don't right now.
Thank you, Ms. Phillips. Ms. Feeney, same question to you. Every candidate seems to have set stock answers about education. Again, I'm assuming you're both in favor of it. Let's try to be a little more specific than that. How do you go about providing adequate funding for education in this state? What will you try and do differently? More importantly, what can you realistically expect to accomplish in this area as one senator, and hopefully working with more?
Has there ever been a candidate that said they were against education? I'm just curious. In your debates.
Locally, I can think of a few.
Yeah,
Other than that, I can't think of too many.
I'm sure. Well, both Ted and
Not
I.
in a Democratic debate.
That's right. Both Ted and I have made this a priority, as you know, Bill, in our campaign, and Will, certainly as a senator. The Chapter 70 Foundation formula is complicated. It's complicated. It was last reformed 1993. I was 15 years old. Didn't understand it then when I was a student in high school, and don't understand it now running for Senate. That's a problem. That's a problem. We need to do a better job, and obviously kind of looking at what that formula, how it's laid out. But at the same time, we have to have an honest discussion about really the basis of that. The basis of the foundation formula was to look at a community's ability to pay. Now, I know certainly here in Norton and in other communities, we've had difficult discussions about what that realistic ability is to pay for education. And I think sometimes the state is out of touch. The state is out of touch with the municipality. And as they try and create that balance and do that dance and look at towns like Wellesley and look at what their ability is to pay versus a town like Norton or a city like Attleboro or a town like Foxborough, we need advocates. We need advocates in the state senate from this district that are going to stand up and say, no, let's look at what the costs are of special education, of what benefit costs are in our communities, of what the median income is in our community, not just on a data sheet or a spreadsheet, but realistically what the financial snapshot is of our towns, and then advocate through that process as we go and change that foundation formula. We are shortchanging $1 to $2 billion or possibly more of our educational system. In Massachusetts, that's unconscionable to me. We need to do better. We need to change that system. I also support the Fair Share Amendment. We can't be afraid of revenue. So many times you get candidates that'll stand up here and they say, well, we want to do this, 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 and this, but they're afraid to talk about revenue. We need to be bold. We need to look at something like the Fair Share Amendment, which will raise those needed revenues to deal with education and transportation, to make sure that every child is put in a great position for a lifetime of learning, whether they're from Wellesley or Lexington or in this district itself. So there's a lot we need to do with that foundation formula. It's basic math, but you'd think we're splitting the atom. We got to do a lot better job in making sure that we can advocate for additional funding. We fix that formula, and then we empower teachers to teach, that we give them the resources that they need to increase education in vital subjects like the arts, to turn STEM into STEAM, so that we're not just teaching to the test, but we're teaching civics and even financial literacy. But we can't do that unless we're addressing the real costs, so that we can actually institute those programs and that curriculum in towns like Norton and throughout this district.
Thank you very much, Mr. Feeney. Ms. Phillips, 1 minute.
Just one of the other cost drivers that I would like to address is the role that charter schools play in our system. I don't think that they're working as they were designed to be, which are laboratories of education, which come up with best practices to offload to the public schools. And unfortunately, Norton this past year saw their override go down. There was $1.1 million allocated in the override for public education. The charter school assessment from the Foxborough Regional Charter School to Norton was $1.5 million. So when local districts are trying to go for overrides to make their budgets, when charter schools are taking more than their share out with very little results, I think there's something wrong with that, and I think that that's another place that we can roll up our sleeves and really have an honest conversation about reevaluating their role in the system and how we can make it better.
Thank you. Mr. Feeney, 1 minute.
So I mentioned, I know we were talking specifically about funding, but I got into some of the additional curriculum I'd like to see. While we're on the subject of education, I'd like to talk a little bit about MCAS and its newest iteration and its standardized testing overall. I think it's important. Look, I've been endorsed by the American Federation of Teachers here in Massachusetts. I agree with them. They are educators that are paid to educate. We need them to be able to go in and educate our children for a lifetime of learning. They can't do that if they're spending money and limited resources teaching to a test. We need to end standardized testing as it's used right now. The punitive use of standardized testing doesn't work for our students, doesn't work for our communities, doesn't work for our school systems, and it doesn't work for our teachers. We need to make sure that we're educating the whole child. We're not just teaching them for an exit test at the end of the year.
Thank you, Mr. Feeney. We'll now move to our next question, and this one begins with Mr. Feeney. Mr. Feeney, we have an opiate epidemic raging through this area, this state, this region, and this country. We have a lot of lives affected and a lot of people addicted. What will you do specifically as a senator to try and address this problem? And what can the legislature do as a body to do the same thing?
I will give the legislature credit on this one, like most of us, and especially throughout cities and towns throughout this district and the Commonwealth. There's a lot of people working to try and at least stall or curb this epidemic. It's a tragedy what we're seeing throughout our communities here in Norton, particularly deadly weekend a couple weeks ago. Certainly not an abstract theory for me. Bill, as the workplace representative of many of my coworkers, I've taken that long trip down to Gosnell Treatment Center down the Cape to try and get treatment for some of my friends, for family members of my friends. I've been to pretty painful wakes of people right in this district, young people who have suffered because of substance abuse. We need to change our approach. Substance abuse and opiates in particular, it's not a criminal justice issue, it's a mental health issue. We need to invest more in mental health for folks that are at risk before they're in the grips of addiction. I'll be a senator that advocates for more beds, more treatment centers in Massachusetts, so that those who seek help can find it. Not only that, I mentioned my coworkers, we have great health insurance. Not everybody in Massachusetts has that privilege. I'll be a senator, and I think it's important that every senator stands up and advocates that we mandate insurance coverage, not just for a quick spin dry where folks go away for 5 days, 7 days, clean up, come out and use again, but for real lasting treatment, for treatment that's transitional and then long-term. We need to do a better job in this opiate epidemic. There's a lot of people working on this. It's a priority of mine. I'm proud to be endorsed by the Massachusetts Coalition of Police, who are the frontline workers on this, as well as the professional firefighters of Massachusetts. Both of those folks, whether they're firefighters or police officers, work on this on a daily basis. They're on the front lines. They see the tragedy, and they come to the legislature and say, you need to do more. Don't just provide us with Narcan to save lives, which is important and vital, and we need to do more of it. But allow us the opportunity to then transition folks that are in trouble, that are addicted, into long-term treatment that changes their lives and changes our communities, frankly.
Thank you, Mr. Feeney. Ms. Phillips, same question. We have an opiate epidemic raging through this state, this region, this area, and this country. We have a lot of lives affected and a lot of people addicted. What will you do as a senator to specifically try and help address this problem? And what can the legislature realistically do as a body to try to do the same thing?
So, as was stated, these are our friends and neighbors who are affected by this. Six overdose calls in Norton over the span of 36 hours. One of them was a fatality. At one of the forums that Paul and I were at right after the question of opioid abuse and how we would combat it was brought up, the moderator interrupted us to let us know that his grandson, his 26-year-old grandson, was claimed by this crisis. Again, these are our friends, our neighbors. These are some of my classmates that are no longer around. What a state senator can do in order to make real change in this crisis is to continually consult the frontline personnel that Paul mentioned, the police, the fire, the healthcare officials, to see what's working and what's not. And we need to bring them in on a regular basis and have ongoing conversations. Set them at regular intervals, be it monthly, 3 months, whatever. But you bring the experts in, you figure out what they're seeing on the front lines, and you have them tell you exactly what's working and what's not. This program was well-intentioned, but it's missing the mark. This one seems to be catching who we need to, the target population that we need to catch. So what a state senator can then do is be part of the legislation that redirects those resources and send the resources to the programs that are working and take the resources away from the ones that, again, were well-intentioned but just aren't doing what they were designed to do. I think that's how we can have a positive impact. I do think that there are some reforms that can be made in the insurance market. Right now, insurance companies only have to cover 14 days of a stay for treatment, and that's proven. The experts are telling us that that's not enough, that people go in for 14 days. I think Paul called it a spin dry, but they come out and their tolerance level is lower and they continue to use drugs at the same amount or the same levels that they were going in at. And that's where you see most of the fatalities coming from. Is when people think that they can use drugs at a level after their tolerance have dropped. And it's just tragic consequences. So I think we can make some real changes in the insurance mandates. Maybe go from 14 days. I would double it to either 28 days or a month, and make sure that people have the resources that they need, the beds that they need, in order to decide that they want to turn their life around and get the help that they need.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Mr. Feeney, 1 minute to add anything else?
Yeah, I think this shows, on the Democratic side anyways, what our commitment is as a whole, both candidates up here. It's particularly tragic, and I know that there's a lot of people doing a lot of good work. We talked a little bit about policy and kind of the reforms and obviously insurance mandates, which I think is so important, and more availability of treatment. But there's also a bit of a personal thing. So we address the policy, moving to the personal. I've spent my entire life trying to help people, whether it's my coworkers, people in my community, people in my neighborhood. There's been a lot of, and my wife Lars, who's here, can attest, there's been a lot of midnight calls from friends of mine and family members of friends of mine that get jammed up, find themselves in a tough situation, don't know where to turn. Sometimes the last thing people can do when they're facing a substance abuse issue is jump on the internet and Google where they're going to find help. So they reach out to people, and often they reach out to their elected leaders. They reach out to the state representatives, they reach out to their state senators. So I think we need to make sure that the state senator from this district knows where to find help for people, is willing to help them find that help. And it really puts everything aside when that phone rings and somebody's looking for help for a substance abuse issue. I'll be that type of senator, and I think it's vital that we have that in the Bristol, Norfolk.
Thank you. And
Sure.
Mr. Phillips?
As a staffer, I've been on the other end of those calls from frightened parents or from frightened relatives who are looking for a treatment bed for their loved one, and you have to drop everything that you're doing and move into making phone calls and trying to get to get people a bed, which are at a premium. It's very, very difficult, but it's one of those things where when you are able to put someone in contact with the resources that they need in order to get better, it makes the job all worthwhile. That's one of the most rewarding things that I've been able to do as a staffer, and that's one of those things that I will be incredibly passionate about as your state senator.
Thank you very much. We'll now move to our next question, and this one will begin with Mr. Phillips. Mr. Phillips, Senator Timilty was and is, he's still alive to the best of my knowledge, is a Democrat, but a reasonably conservative one in what is a reasonably conservative district. What will the differences be in approach, style, and results if you are elected to fill his seat? And many people believe that electing a Republican might help the disparity in the State House. Can you explain why a Democrat would be a better choice than any of the Republicans in the race, in your opinion?
Sure. Senator Timilty did a great job for this district. We've established that 100 times over. And I think that the model that he set in terms of constituent services, in terms of being out here, being responsive, you're not going to see a lot of difference between him and myself on how that works. When you get a little bit towards Beacon Hill. I think I have a different set of relationships than he did. As I said, I've worked on Beacon Hill for the last 11 years. I have a different style and a different set of friends up there. But I think that I would look forward to putting those relationships to work to affect meaningful policy reform that makes the lives better for the residents of the Bristol and Norfolk. When it comes to the district itself and whether or not it is more conservative than not, and why a Democrat over a Republican, I think that there are actually some major institutional advantages to electing a Democrat to the seat over a Republican, because in the Massachusetts State Senate, every Democratic senator is a committee chairman by virtue of the fact that there are more joint committees than there are state senators. So as a result, one of us would be coming in to the state Senate, would get a committee assignment, would have broad discretion over a number of bills, and would be able to use that as leverage to enact a policy agenda on Beacon Hill that any Republican would not be able to. Right now, that there are 6 Republicans in the Massachusetts State Senate, and all of the Republicans, by virtue of the fact that there are only 6 of them, are all in Republican leadership. So what happens is that if you elect a Republican for this seat, you are actually electing the first backbench Republican that will have they'll be the ranking member on a couple of committees, but they won't be considered a member of leadership because there are no more of those to go around. So I think that there are some institutional advantages to electing a Democrat, along with the fact that our ideas, quite frankly, are better.
Thank you very much. Mr. Feeney, same question. Senator Timothy was a Democrat, which I'm sure is news to you, but a fairly conservative one in what is a fairly conservative district. What will the differences be in approach, style, and results if you were elected to fill his seat? And with many people arguing about, we should elect more Republicans and help the disparity and hold Democrats accountable, can you explain why you would think, I'm taking a chance here that you do think this, that a Democrat would be a better choice than any other Republican?
So first off, Bill, Senator Timothy did an incredible job representing this district because he understood that the vital job of a state senator, number one, is to serve the constituents of the people that you represent. I remember when I first went to work for him, and it was a brand new operation. He went to work as our state senator, and I went to work as a chief of staff, and neither of us had any sort of background in the building. We went up there, and he was very direct, and he said, look, the number one thing we're going to do is serve the people. We're not going to get bogged down in bill numbers and legislation in this building, but we're actually going to go out and we're going to listen to people and we're going to serve them and we're going to meet their needs. And I think that's, before you get into Republican or Democrat, that's the absolute number one job of a state senator, and certainly how I intend to serve. I get a little bit tired, and I don't mean any disrespect to the question because I think it's a great one and a discussion that we should be having, but I get a little bit tired of the discourse around this country and even locally, and anybody that's on social media can attest to the fact that it's pretty divisive. And it breaks down amongst Democrats and Republicans, but then even further, we have a lot of problems in our own Democratic Party that we need to work on, right? This is a big tent party. But I'll tell you that I'm a Democrat for a reason. And I'm a proud Democrat because I think we stand up for people. We lift people up, we give them hope. We fight for values that are important to the people of this district and throughout the state and throughout this country. Minimum wage, healthcare, education, women's rights, standing up against hate, especially recently. You'll find that the two Democratic candidates were at each of the rallies in this district when we had a tragedy down south recently and we were standing out against hate. It's Democrats that were there. Those are our values. Now, I think it's important we get back to our roots of Franklin Delano Roosevelt and John F. Kennedy and stand up for people and offer them a new deal of economic prosperity that far too often the middle class has been left behind by both parties. But we need leadership that isn't just about partisan rancor, but that it's about stepping up for values, standing up for people, and that recognizes that there is a growing population of folks that are disaffected and that frankly aren't a part of this political process anymore. And it's important that the next state senator from this district, which I hope is a Democrat, is able to recognize that, to bring people together, to fight for our values of this district, and to represent everybody, whether you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, equally and fairly. But we need somebody who's not afraid to stand up to the system either. I've done that. When I got to work on the Bernie Sanders campaign, people told me I was crazy to get involved in such a divisive race for president. And I understood that. But I also understood that there was a lot of people that had been left behind. They wanted to feel like they were part of the process again. And ultimately, I think that's where we got to. We have a lot of issues to fix. Partisan rancor is not going to fix any of them. It's just going to make it worse. I'll be the type of state senator that brings people together, that fights for those values that I outlined, and that serves the people of this district above all else.
Thank you, Mr. Feeney. And Mr. Phillips, 1 minute.
Sure. I'm a great fan of the President Kennedy quote, let us not seek the Republican idea or the Democratic idea, but the right idea. I think it's important to note that even though I feel very strongly that this district is best represented by a Democrat, I can work with both parties on Beacon Hill. I have good relationships on both sides of the aisle. And I think that that is very much in line with what the residents of the Bristol and Norfolk want from their state senator. And so that's one of the things that I'm very proud to be a Democrat, but I'm also very proud of the fact that I can work with everybody and fully intend to do so.
Thank you. And Mr. Feeney, anything in 1 minute?
So I think I said it all. I think it's important that the next senator be independent, regardless of the party that they're in, but that we advocate for values. Look, I'm a proud Democrat. Just this past spring, I served as the co-chair of the Massachusetts Democratic Platform Committee, where we moved our Massachusetts platform to a more progressive place, where we stood up for people, where we gave people hope, where we actually fought for people. Now, it's important to put that on a platform because that's kind of our backbone, right? Those are our ideals as Democrats. But it's more important to put that into action. And the oxygen of that platform is to elect good Democrats that stand up to leaders, that stand up to power, that speak truth to power, that recognize that we need to fight for people above all else. I'm a proud Democrat. I'm a proud Democrat because of my values, but I also know that it takes real leadership and bold leadership from every party to actually stand up for people and make change, rather than just doing what we're seeing time after time in legislative session, which is to protect their own power
10 seconds.
at the peril of trying to pass a lot of good legislation for people.
Thank you, Mr. Feeney. And we'll start the next question with Mr. Feeney. And thank you both for helping me lead into the next question. This has been a tough few years for campaigning, particularly on the national level. Many people are tired of all the negativity and the negative attacks. So, Mr. Feeney, let's turn it around here. Would you please tell us what you have come to like and respect most about your opponent?
The list is long, Mr. Moderator. I will tell you that having campaigning with Ted, and Ted and I knew each other a little bit, from years ago. I will tell you, and I'll take it a little bit old school. Growing up in the neighborhood, when there was a lot about a person that we liked, we said that they were good people. And I think Ted is just good people. He's a solid guy who cares about a lot of issues. He's a good family man. He's worked hard in Sharon, and overall, he's a good guy. He's a likable person, and I've seen that previous to this campaign, and obviously throughout the last couple of months.
Thank you, Ms. Feeney. Ms. Phillips, same question to you. This has been a tough few years for campaigning, particularly on the national level. Many people are tired of all the negative attacks. So let's turn it around here. What would you say you've come to respect and like most about your opponent?
I think when you say come to respect, it sort of sets up the question, it's not come to respect because, as I've said, or as Paul just said, we've known each other for many years. We've actually worked on a couple of the campaigns together. Paul was the head of labor for Stephen Lynch when, I did some volunteer work on that campaign, working, in and around the orbit of Senator Timilty when he was the chief of staff. I actually worked in the Senate for State Senator Steve Brewer. So we were, working in the same chamber at the same time, and I got a chance to know him then, which was, going back 12 years now. And the best thing I can say is that the same thing. He's good people. He's passionate. Paul wears his heart on his sleeve. You know exactly what he believes, and he's not afraid to tell you that. I think that's an incredibly impressive quality. He's a wonderful family guy. His wife Laura is here tonight, and she supports him unbelievably. She's come to a lot of different events, and I think that speaks volumes about the quality of his character. So I think the world of Paul, and I think that again, when this campaign ends in a couple of weeks, I don't think either of us is going to have a problem supporting the nominee of our party because we started this off as friends, and we're going to finish this as friends, and I'm proud to call him a friend.
Thank you, Phillips. Mr. Feeney, anything you'd like to add?
Well, we get to rebut
You
that?
want to rebut?
Yeah, okay, you can
I may
rebut
want to
that.
rebut all the nice things he said about me.
This is that Jane, you ignorant. No, never.
Yeah, right. No, thank you. It's a great question, and it really does show a difference, not only amongst Democrats, but really in this district. We're blessed to talk about issues. It's been a campaign that's been issue-driven, and we've both worked hard. And I think we need more of that in the state Senate, and I think the district will be served to nominate or to elect a Democrat here in October, especially one that's good people, which both of us apparently are.
Thank you. Mr. Phillips, anything you want to add?
There's really not too much sugar. There's really no more cherry I could put on that cupcake. It's like I said, I'm very proud that to consider Paul a friend. I hope that he considers me one as well, and that's going to last a long time into the future.
Thank you very much. We'll now start the question with Mr. Phillips, and despite any amount of begging that the candidates may do, this will be our final question
Okay.
of the evening. So let's make it a good one. I'm sorry, it's Mr. Phillips we'll start with. Mr. Phillips, the MBTA, what in the world are we going to do with it? There's no doubt it's a key piece in our overall development strategy in this area and well beyond. But it's been plagued with issues, both funding and service related. Do you favor any particular long-term strategy when it comes to the T? And as part of that, and you knew it was coming, do you believe the trial program approved for Foxborough at the stadium will be a positive for the town and the area?
What are we going to do with it? The T is a mess. It has been a mess for quite some time. It is completely mismanaged. I was very disappointed in Governor Baker's new appointment, the GM, I think his name is Mr. Ramirez, who has no background in transportation and has had to restate the earnings of his previous company, and now looks like his previous companies went bankrupt. So maybe he is a good fit for the MBTA. We have a real problem, I think, in Massachusetts, particularly in the South Coast region. We're not getting the world-class transportation system that we deserve. There's a lot of ways that we can go about fixing this. The philosophy that I have espoused throughout the campaign has been one of not expanding anywhere until we can make the system as it currently exists run efficiently, reliably, and give people a dependable commute. I think that the Foxborough pilot program is bad for taxpayers. It's going to lose $750,000 in its first year, which will match the loss that the MBTA is incurring on the Greenbush line of $750,000. So there's 1.5 down the drain. I don't think that the projected ridership is going to have the economic development consequences in Foxborough that the proponents think that it will. So as a result, I'm opposed. And I also have grave safety concerns for the people in South Walpole who have been, quite frankly, ignored throughout this process, where the safety mitigation requests that they've made, things like, gates at grade crossings, have been just ignored by the MBTA. That's not acceptable. And as a state senator, I'm going to advocate for the reallocation of those resources. We should not be expanding anywhere right now until we make the system work as currently constituted. I think we can do so much better in this field.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Mr. Feeney, same question. The MBTA, what in the heck are we going to do with it? There is no doubt it's a key piece of our overall development strategy in the area and beyond, but it's been plagued with issues, both funding and service related. Do you favor any particular long-term strategy when it comes to the T? And do you believe the trial program approved for Foxborough at the stadium will be a positive for the town and the area?
All right, first, overall on the MBTA, I think you're right in the way you asked the question. The MBTA has been an unmitigated disaster. They haven't served, they haven't kept their promises really to the communities they serve, to their riders who ride the T, and to the workers who they employ. It's cut across all sorts of administrations. The MBTA has been mismanaged. Every year we hear that the legislature is going to enact some reform and that there's going to be something that's going to be done about it, yet we find ourselves in that same cycle over and over again, where now we're left with a crumbling system, crumbling public transportation infrastructure. Look, I'm a supporter of public transportation in all of its forms. I think it's important we invest in the MBTA, that we build a north-south rail link to actually have a system that allows us to go through Boston, that we invest in rail that goes from the New York border to the coast in Boston. And I think it's important that we invest in projects that not only take people off the roads, but that allow us to grow our economy. And I think the Patriot Place proposal does exactly that. I was on the Patriot Place Review Committee prior to my service as a selectman in Foxborough. And one of the things we talked about was, what Patriot Place was going to look like, not just 5 years out, not 10 years out, but really kind of a long-term plan. And that long-term plan included having development across from Patriot Place to Route 1. And, it included being kind of a hub of activity to grow our economy. I'm one of those people. I've worked in Boston, like I said, for the last 18 years. I get on that nightmare commute like most people, up 95 and then 128 in the expressway. It's a disaster. But what are my alternatives? My alternatives in Foxborough and the towns around me is to go to Mansfield and fight for a parking spot, to go to Sharon and get shut out if you're there anytime after 8 o'clock with no parking, to go to Walpole and do the same thing, or to get in my car and listen to my Sports Hub radio and drive up 95 and sit in traffic in misery with everyone else. We need to do more. The MBTA hasn't done a great job, no doubt about it. But that's not enough to say that we can stop investing. We need to put more trains and more cars, more opportunities for people to be able to take public transportation. Not only that, but that reverse commute is a real thing. That when we see Schneider Electric in Foxborough, which is bringing hundreds of jobs into our region, they've come to the town of Foxborough, they've come to the electeds in this area and said, we need a way to get talented individuals from Boston, where they're living now, to their jobs. Same thing in Mansfield and Norton. When we're out there fighting for economic development, we want to be able to offer people public transportation. I support the project in Foxborough in principle. I think it's smart. It's in my backyard. I understand fully the residents of South Walpole and their need to address safety concerns, noise, pollution, things like that. I'll be a senator that stands up for them, that fights for mitigation. But again, I think it's important that we grow, that we progress, that we give people opportunity, that we take cars off the road, and that we allow people the opportunity to go to their doctors, to go to schools, to go to their jobs. And I think public transportation is how we do that.
Thank you, Mr. Feeney. And Ms. Phillips, anything you'd like to add in a minute?
Indeed. I think that the demonstrated need for services is on the Providence line. We do have parking issues in Mansfield, in Sharon, and to a lesser extent in Attleboro. But that's where I think we should be working on. We should be working to mitigate those parking problems, coming up with creative solutions so that we can, provide a parking spot for anybody who wants to take the train, and then make sure that there are trains running at regular intervals, in fact, more frequently, so that people can rely on the MBTA for a safe, reliable, efficient commute. That's going to be one of my top priorities as your state senator.
Thank you. And Mr. Feeney?
So the issue of overcrowding on trains and reliability is definitely a major issue for anybody that's ridden the commuter rails. I do it from time to time, and I'm sometimes just as miserable on the train than I am on 95. It's definitely an issue, which is why I think we need to expand, which is why I think we need to take Foxborough people and others that are in that Route 1 area and give them an opportunity to commute without going to Mansfield, the second busiest train station in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It's important to have a little bit of pressure relief valve for the current stations and the current system, and I think we do that. Look, there's people working more than 40 hours a week in most of the communities of this district. Public transportation is what they rely on. Seniors, people that are disabled, they rely on public transportation. We need more of it. We need to invest. We need to increase the revenue. We need fundamental change, but we can't just put up a wall and say we're not going to do it anymore until it's fixed. We need a senator that's going to fight for those issues, that's going to fight for those values, and that's going to give people opportunity, not only to get to work in the morning in a safe and comfortable way, but again, to build on what we're currently doing and to increase economic opportunity throughout the region.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, and that concludes our question portion of the debate. And we will now move to the closing statements. Before we go to the closing statements, I'd just like to say I have moderated many debates, even in the studio. Jason and I were talking tonight that we've done a lot of debates, and this debate, in terms of the quality of the answers and the quality of the candidates, is right up there with the best that I've seen. So I compliment both gentlemen and your performance and your candidacies, and thank you very much for taking the time to come tonight. And now we'll move to the closing statements, and according to the flip of the coin, I believe the first closing statement comes from Mr. Feeney.
And in keeping with the Mutual Admiration Society, Mr. Moderator, I'll say that we've done a lot of debates in this race, a couple of forums, but we've appeared in a lot of places, and you are certainly top of the list when it comes to moderating something like this. And I know there's a lot of work that you do for the community and that Jason does here at Norton Media Center.
I won't count that to your 3 minutes.
Well, no, that's okay. That's okay, because honestly, I didn't prepare any written text because, this is kind of our closer, I think, for this campaign. We're running down to the end here the last few days. I think it's important to be able to speak from the heart. Again, I'm somebody who wears my heart on my sleeve. I've done it my entire life, because it's not just about legislation that we're talking about. It's not just about bills. It's not just about what happens in the State House. It's about us. It's about our district. It's about our values. It's about our ideals. It's about who's going to stand up for us and move us forward as a district. Who's going to fight for us? Who's going to fight for those things I pointed out earlier, like women's rights? Who's going to fight for public safety in our communities? Who's going to fight to increase the minimum wage? Who's going to fight to make sure that every man, woman, and child are covered under an affordable health care plan? Who's going to make sure that we're fighting for college students so that they don't face a lifetime of college debt? Those are the types of things that are at stake in this election. We've seen a lot of divisiveness throughout this country, and even in this district from time to time, and in our own communities. We're better than that. We're better than that. We can do more to fight for people. We can disagree without being disagreeable. We can pass legislation and fight for people, without demonizing them. It's important that your next senator is able to do that. I'm somebody who's fought my entire life for people. A blue-collar worker who's had some incredible opportunities. I've been blessed. Been blessed to become part of a middle class and to have an American dream that I don't want to see disappear for people in Walpole, Mansfield, Foxborough, Attleboro, throughout this district. I think we need to protect that. We need a senator who's willing to stand up for that, to speak truth to power, and to fight for those values. I'm proud to be endorsed by the Sierra Club, Fighting for Our Environment, Massachusetts AFL-CIO, Massachusetts Nurses Association, the Professional Firefighters of Massachusetts, the Massachusetts Coalition of Police, Progressive Mass, Mass Alliance. Those are thousands of members throughout this district. Thousands of people that care about issues like that are supporting my candidacy. But none of that matters unless you show up to vote. I'd like to turn to you and ask you for your vote on Tuesday, September 19th in the Democratic primary. Whoever you vote for, just make sure you get out, you vote, and you stay engaged. Our democracy depends on it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Feeney. Mr. Phillips, your closing statement.
I will start again, Bill, by thanking you, thanking the Norton Democratic Town Committee, the Norton Media Center, for facilitating this tonight. I've really enjoyed the campaign thus far, getting out to the Fighting Nine towns of Bristol and Norfolk. I've knocked on a lot of doors. I've had a lot of great conversations with residents, and that has only driven me further in order to want to be your senator. I think that I bring the right blend of state and local experience to fight for our cities and towns on Beacon Hill. I'm very proud to have the endorsements of local officials, like 3 of the 4 Mansfield selectmen, Selectman Mike Flaherty of Norton, 2 of the Sharon selectmen, former selectman Cliff Snuffer from Walpole. I'm very proud of the fact that a lot of local officials have come forward and said, you know who we need fighting for us on Beacon Hill? We need Ted Phillips. So I humbly ask for your vote on September 19th. as Paul said, it's very important that you do go to the polls, that you stay engaged in our democracy. After what happened in November, it's more important than ever. So I would just ask that before you do, you check us out. My website is www.tedphillips.org. That's one L in Phillips. And we're on Facebook, Ted Phillips for Senate. I hope you'll go and you'll take a look at what we've been doing for the past few months in this special election, because I think you'll agree that nobody wants to be your senator more than I do, and nobody is going to work harder for you than I will. So again, with that, I will respectfully, again, ask for your vote in the Democratic primary on September 19th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips, and thank you, gentlemen. Well, that completes our debate for the evening. I would like to thank our candidates, Mr. Paul Feeney and Mr. Ted Phillips, and wish them both good luck on September 19th. I would also like to thank Jason Benjamin and everyone at Norton Media Center for doing the real work and making this entire production possible. Without Norton Media Center, the voters would not have this opportunity to hear from their candidates directly. And our thanks to the Norton Democratic Town Committee and its chairperson, Barbara, and Mimi, who's here tonight, and to the entire committee for stepping up and sponsoring this important event. Civic groups like that are very important in their contribution to the process. Lastly, we remind everyone that primary election day is Tuesday, September 19th. The polls will be open in most places, I believe, till 8 p.m. And if you are unable to vote in person, you can obtain absentee ballots in advance from the town clerk's office in your town hall or city hall. Your government, on all levels, plays an important role in your life. It is your duty and your responsibility to take an active part in choosing the people who run it. If you don't vote, shut up. For Norton Media Center and the Norton Democratic Town Committee, I'm Bill Gouveia. Thank you and happy voting.